foolish mortals, to the Villain's Lair, presented by the Shivering Mouse podcast. Today we're going to talk about the villain from the movie we talked about on Tuesday. We're talking about the evil Voodoo King of New Orleans. Ooh, I almost slid into another story there. Voodoo King of New Orleans, Dr. Facilier. He's the only person who refers to himself as Dr. Facilier. Goodness knows where this man apparently got his doctorate, but Dr. Facilier it is. Dr. Facilier is commonly known to most people as the Shadow Man, and he usually needs no introduction. This is likely because voodoo practitioners were often considered a pillar or the most powerful member of their community. They very rarely were of a person of little influence. Usually even the local politicians and farmers and everybody would not only know who this person was, but refer to them for some kind of guidance in their daily life. So Dr. Facilier would be quite powerful in his own life. His name, Facilier, is kind of interesting. It means easier in French, and it's kind of interesting that that's his name because a lot of his customers are coming to him kind of seeking an easy way out of their problems. Rather than work their way out of their problems like our protagonist, Tiana, these people prefer to, turn to dark sorcery, because if you don't reach your goals within so many, tries, dark sorcery is the natural next alternative, right? No, it's not. Well, so a lot of people think that Facilier is kind of a reference to the fact that he makes life easier. I take kind of a different road on this. I keep in mind that the setting of the movie is New Orleans, and so New Orleans is known as the Big Easy, and so I think his last name is basically just kind of a shout out in French to the location of the film. I think it's just kind of a wink to where the movie takes place. Maybe I just don't look into things deeply enough. Who knows? Anyway, Dr. Facilier is primarily motivated by two things in this movie, and these are two things that are deeply, deeply tied together for this particular villain. He is motivated by both greed and jealousy. Now, why would one of the most powerful people in a community be motivated by greed and jealousy? Because there's somebody who has more than him. He is jealous of Big Daddy LaBeouf, who is Charlotte's daddy. He is extremely envious of Big Daddy because Big Daddy has a lot of money. It's really hard to say Big Daddy without laughing. I'm trying to not even smile like it's a normal name to have. It's not. And his real name is Eli, so that might be easier, but you primarily throughout the movie hear him called Big Daddy, so it's hard to call him anything else and think people are going to know who you're talking about. So Big Daddy it is. Well, it's funny, too, because I think part of what grinds Facilier's gears about Big Daddy specifically is that he is not a disliked person. I think people who are driven by envy like to think of the people that they're envious of as being a worse person than them. Big Daddy's not. He is very generous with his money. He's not stingy at all. He recognizes that while he's worked hard and earned his fortune, there are those who haven't. You see him give a huge handful of money to the newspaper boy just for giving him a newspaper. This isn't because Big Daddy is unfamiliar with the value of a newspaper. You don't get to be wealthy without being careful with your money and knowing how much different things cost. He wants to help the kid, and part of why he and his daughter hang out at the teeny little diner where Tiana works is because he's known Tiana her whole life and wants to help her. He's a supportive, nice guy, and that's part of why he is voted in the position of Mardi Gras King. However, Dr. Facilier wants Big Daddy's money, and it's so much easier to think of the people we're jealous of as a villain, and it just makes him even more angry that he can't have a tangible reason to hate Big Daddy other than the fact that he has a lot of money. And that in and of itself is not a flaw. And so Facilier he's struggling with his terrible envy, his terrible greed, and the fact that he's one of the most powerful people in town is just not enough for him. He needs more. And so this drives him to be willing to kill Big Daddy in order to take his fortune, because, just disliking somebody from the shadows is not enough, I guess. You want to move it to that next step. Now, he says to Prince Naveen that he is a royal on his mother's side. I believe this references the fact that he's probably the son of one of the great voodoo queens of New Orleans. There would be several voodoo queens in the area at the time, and they would all kind of run their own separate district. We see this with Mama Odie. She's the voodoo queen of the Bayou. I think she chose an area where she's not going to get a ton of customers, because I think she makes customers a little angry with her policy to only give people what they need and what not what they want, just what they specifically need in their lives. This would make her, a little more prone to have to hang out on her own, because nobody ever wants what they need. They want what they want, and nobody ever wants to hear what they need. If you've ever had to explain something to a friend that was truthful but might have hurt their feelings, but you knew it was going to help them in the long run, you understand how this goes and why Mama Odie may not be the most popular voodoo queen, but why her magic tends to be much lighter than that of Dr. Facilier. It's because she tries to help people rather than just gain what she can from them. The most famous of the voodoo queens was probably Marie Laveau. You can still visit her grave in one of the beautiful, famous cemeteries surrounding New Orleans. She's still considered the greatest of all voodoo queens. She kind of took out all of the other voodoo queens in the area and ruled as like the queen of queens at the time. Now, originally in the Disney screenplay, Dr. Facilier was supposed to be Mama Odie's son. That subplot was later scrapped, and so now I think he's officially not related to Mama Odie, but he was obviously related to one of the great voodoo queens, and so it's kind of important to understand him to know kind of how that hierarchy works. Just because you're a voodoo queen doesn't mean you're the only one. There would be one for each district, so the quarter would have one, the Bayou would have one, all that kind of stuff. So it's kind of broken down in that way, almost like separate city-states for each area of the city. It's a little strange, but typically, as I said, these voodoo queens would be the most powerful person in their community. They'd be a community leader, and so it is kind of important to know that bit of his background. It's also important because that means that from a very, very young age, he would have begun his training as a voodoo practitioner, perhaps shortly after infancy. He just had to show kind of a tendency towards that talent, and then, of course, being the son of a voodoo queen, it's likely that his mother was the one who taught him how to practice voodoo and hoodoo. Now, his friends on the other side are called Loa. They are not really voodoo deities. They're more like an intermediary. They intercede on behalf of the practitioner to the actual voodoo deities. However, they do expect to be worshipped and, kind of, I don't know, don't want to say pandered to, but basically that's it. They want you to kind of puff them up as if they're a deity, but they are not technically the voodoo deities themselves. Dr. Facilier must not have been in debt to them at the beginning of his career, because you start your career with your same Loa, and those are your Loa for the rest of your life. And so they must have had a somewhat functional working relationship before he came to be in debt with them, and in the end they do decide to settle their own debt and take his soul for their own rather than the souls of the rest of New Orleans, which he has promised to them, because he finds himself unable to pay that debt. In this way, Dr. Facilier, because he keeps asking favor after favor after favor from the Loa in order to continue his journey to attack Big Daddy LaBeouf out of envy, in many ways, Dr. Facilier is then, in fact, literally consumed by his own envy and greed. It's kind of an interesting metaphor for a Disney villain, just because it's so directly thrown out there. Lady Tremaine's envy becomes her problem, but in a much more subtle way in Cinderella, whereas in Princess and the Frog, it's pretty direct. He's ripped down to hell, pretty much. I mean, I know it's not canon-wise specifically hell, just because there's no actual Satanism in the movie, but essentially that's what happens to him. Let's be real. They steal his soul and drag him away. And so this is a much more intense visual representation of him being consumed by his own greed and his own jealousy. Now, little kids just kind of see this as a scary man, and yeah, I mean, kids are truly observant. You should never trust a man with a crocodile tooth necklace and a belly shirt. Nothing good comes of going down that road. And so kids kind of pick up on these visual cues about Dr. Facilier and become intimidated by him, but adults are the ones who can really see what he's motivated by, because it is kind of a complicated plan, and his plan is complicated because since he's unable to cast voodoo or hoodoo on himself, he has to kind of work through others. He has to be intelligent enough, persuasive enough, charismatic enough, exciting enough to bend others to his will, since he is unable to use his magic to influence his own life. So he really is one of Disney's more clever villains, one of their more charming villains. I want to put him right up there with like Ratigan from The Great Mouse Detective, because he also has an incredible ability to persuade the others around him to do what he wants by charming them. But of course, when you are no longer useful, he's anything but charming. And so those two villains kind of have that in common. I guess what I want to know next is, what do you think? Do you think it was greed and jealousy that motivated Dr. Facilier? Do you think he is a psychopath or a sociopath? He does show an interesting ability to be very charming and persuasive and really sweet to be around as long as you have something he wants. And then as soon as you don't, he just kind of cuts you off and shuts down. And so I do wonder if there's a little bit of kind of not just your basic jealousy, but maybe a mental disorder. And I think it almost takes that to move from regular jealousy to the next step of wanting to kill someone and actually like having a plan involving multiple people's lives. So let me know. I'm not a psychologist, so let me know. What do you think is going on in this man's head? Because I'm fascinated that someone could be so motivated by greed and jealousy, not even deliberate hatred, just greed and jealousy, that they would be willing to kill to take what belongs to him, what has been earned by someone else. Tell me what you think about Dr. Facilier and his plan, and we'll see you on Tuesday with our next movie. Thank you for tuning in.